Say when. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Coffee with Father James. I am back to our origins today. It's an origin story. I'm using the Gary Larson Far Side mug today, the original mug. I want to tell you a story, and it's an origin story. In order to tell the story, we need to go back to the early 80s, late 70s. There was an event in 1978 that changed the world, and it was the election of a Polish Cardinal, Karol Wojtyła, as Pope. He became Pope John Paul II, and his impact on the course of world history was immense, especially his role, well-documented role in bringing about the fall of the Iron Curtain. And it all began when he visited his homeland of Poland after he was made Pope, and at that time, Poland was reeling. It had been under Soviet communist rule for more than 40 years. About 40 years. And things were starting to move, and there was a trade union movement. You know, ironically, it was a movement of workers who resisted the communist powers, called Solidarność, or Solidarity, in the Gdansk shipyards. And some of you will remember that time of great upheaval. And John Paul went there and preached the gospel and stirred up something. Something happened, because the church in Poland at that time was a source of resistance to the status quo, a resistance to the communist regime, and it followed with this new hope that sprung up. But then what followed was a time of martial law, a time of suppression. And throughout all of those years, when the church was very much persecuted, and faithful Catholics really had a hard time. I mean, you were really ostracized from the corridors of power if you held on to your faith. And that was a period, late 70s, early 80s, of great immigration, or great emigration. People left the country. And many of those faithful Catholics found a home on these shores in Nova Scotia. And so by 1984, the Polish population had grown in our city, in our diocese, so much so that Archbishop Hayes, the Archbishop at the time, founded a special apostolate to the Polish community. And that included the celebration of Mass. I'm not sure who the first priests were who said Mass, but Mass for the Polish community in our diocese began in 1984. The first Mass was at St. John the Baptist Church in Halifax, and then it moved to St. Joseph's Church in the north end of Halifax. Mass was held there for about 8.5, 9 years, until they moved to St. Anthony's in North Dartmouth. And they moved here to this parish, 1993. And in let me check, I do have notes here. Yes, that's what I thought. So they moved here in 1993, and it was in 1997, I should remember that date, that was the year I was ordained. That's when a formal Polish parish was brought into existence, and it was what was called a non-territorial parish. Most parishes have a geographical range, but this parish was for the whole diocese. Anyone of Polish background, ethnicity, language could be a part of this parish. And so that was the beginning in 1997, where there really was a formal Polish parish rooted here at the St. Anthony's location. St. Anthony's location, the traditional parish here had been in decline for quite a number of years, and so it was viewed as a partnership. And at that time, we started having Polish priests being the pastors, and so they were pastors of both communities. And you know, like any partnership, there were ups and downs in that, but for the most part, it worked, and the community moved forward. It was brought into existence by Archbishop Burke at the time. He's the bishop who ordained me. And it was actually called St. Anthony of Saxony. Now, why they I'm not sure who chose the name, but why they had, St. Anthony of Padua and St. Anthony of Saxony gets a little confusing. Even for Catholics, it gets confusing. Too many Tonys. Anyway, so you got this Polish community, and by the year 2000, that was a very particular year for Polish Catholics, because the now Saint John Paul II canonized Saint Faustina, or Sister Faustina, who is the visionary, the religious sister whose visions led to the Divine Mercy devotion. And she was canonized in the year 2000. Saint Faustina Kowalski, I think her last name is. And so they changed the name. It was never formally changed. We have the documents but the community became known as the Mission of St. Faustina's, and I just want to show you something. Because that's why at the side of the wall here at St. Anthony's you have, well, St. Faustina's Polish Mission. And so that formally came into existence in 1997, name was changed in the year 2000, but the Polish community found a home here at St. Anthony's since 1993. They've been here for 30 years, making use of our buildings. And it's been, the world has changed in these last 30 years, as you know. It was in many ways a way for them to hold on to their language, to their culture, their traditions. They had a Polish festival, often would take place here. And the Polish community contributed greatly to the maintenance of our buildings. They helped maintain the buildings, they helped fix things, and that partnership, sometimes, when you form a good partnership, you help each other. And so that happened for many decades. Now, we know that this whole parish has been struggling with decline over the last 30 years as well. The world has changed a lot since 1997 or 1993. And in the year 2020, January 1st, the parishes, the communities of Immaculate Conception, St. Paul's, St. Peter's, St. Anthony's, and canonically, still, the parish of St. Anthony's of Saxony, now known as St. Faustina's, were merged into one. It was what is called in canon law an extinctive union, which means all of those parishes cease to exist. All of those communities no longer exist canonically and legally, and they're brought into one new parish. And of course, then the pandemic happened a couple of months later, and then I showed up in the midst of it all, trying to sort through everything. And one of the difficulties seems to have been that there seems to have been a lack of awareness. I mean, we struggled across the whole parish with trying to understand what this actually meant, but there seems to have been, from my earliest conversation with the Polish community, a lack of awareness of what that actually meant for them. The fact that canonically the community no longer exists was a shock to many. Of course, they existed as a community, of course. So how it all was to fit together, we weren't sure. And over the last couple of years, we in the parish have really tried hard to find the proper way for this relationship to function, because they're not a typical parish. People they come from Truro, from Bridgewater, from all over the place. So it's an anomaly, and it's not going to fit a mold. So we tried to find a way to make it happen. All the while, well, we had to ask the bigger questions around our buildings. How do we sustain these buildings? Remember, 2022, all of our buildings operationally and basic maintenance cost us $1,000 a day. That's what we were paying for our buildings. So we can't live in a bubble from the past. We've got to deal with our present. Our reality is changing. We've closed Immaculate Conception. We closed St. Paul's location through a long, arduous, and difficult process. And our vision is for this location to remain open. But in order for this location to remain open, it can't simply be used once a week. This is a fairly big building. It needs to be heated. We have to form partnerships and increase the operations and share the burden of expense. And that meant that things were changing. The use of the hall was changing. The use of the church was changing. And one of the things we did is we closed the dividers inside. The original church was built. You can see in the building here that there are two parts. And the original church in early 70s, when it was built, had a divider so that this could be used as a community hall space, and this was the chapel. and on Sundays it would be opened. For the last number of years, it's been opened and there were fixed pews put in. So we removed the pews and we've closed the divider, and we did that for two purposes. Number one, to save on the cost of heating, to try to have two different zones, and secondly, to have alternate use of the space here and to maintain the sacred nature of this building with a chapel. Okay. Now, all the while doing this, we were trying to enter into conversation with the Polish community who have a long history on this location about how do you fit into this vision of a renewed parish, about what we're trying to do. And it was a difficult conversation. I understand that for many in the community there was a feeling that somehow we didn't respect the history or we didn't understand the history, and we were moving on kind of in a way that wasn't respecting their particular involvement in this place. And I recognize could we have done things better? You can always do things better than you did. But we had several meetings with the Polish community, inviting them, be a part. Don't just be off on the side. Truly, let's find a way for you to be a part of our parish, a real part of our parish. And time again, I think for me and for the leadership of our parish, we heard a message, and that message was, you know something? Thanks, but no thanks. We just want to do our thing, and our thing is Mass in Polish. So for the last year, for the last couple of years since I've been here, the Polish community have had a weekly Mass here. People continue to come in. Like every community, numbers have gone down. They had diminished before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and so they're no different than any other parish. But their numbers had been, up until recently, around 30, 40 people on a weekend. And so they found the change use of the hall to be difficult, and they found the closing of the divider to be difficult for them as well. So why am I telling you this story? It's because we recently found out a couple of weeks ago that a delegation went to the Archbishop and asked if they could move to a different parish. I spoke with the Archbishop. I told him that, well, I was saddened to hear this because I believe that we could have found a way to make this work, that I supported this decision. And then we've just found out recently that things are moving fairly quickly, and that this past weekend was the final weekend of Mass here. So I'm here to tell you, the parishioners of Our Lady of Guadalupe, that this change is happening, and it's happening quickly. So what do I want to say? First of all, I want to thank the Polish community for all that they contributed over the years. 30 years is a long time. What you contributed to this place, you left your mark in this place. I want to say, secondly, that as pastor, and I think I speak for our parish staff and parishioners, that we understand your decision. We're saddened by it. I think it's a loss. It's a loss for us, and we won't have Sunday Eucharist celebrated here anymore for the first time since the late 1940s, when this church, the original church, was opened. That's a loss. But most of all, we wish you well, and we will be praying for you as you find a new home. And some of you may be asking, well, where are they going? Well, guess what? They're going over across the bridge, returning to Halifax. I mean, the Polish community began at John the Baptist Parish, and they then met at St. Joseph's Church. They're moving next door to that location, to St. Teresa's Church. Again, they're moving over to another parish that is itself going through a lot of change at this time, but it may very well be easier for them because, again, people gather from all different communities and directions. So we wish you well. We'll be praying for you. We ask that you pray for us, and we thank you again for all that you've given. And over the next week or two, we're going to be working with members of the Polish community to make sure they can take with them the things that are a part of their story and a part of their heritage. There's a lot of items, and we'll have to sort through it, like what do you take, what don't you take, but we wish you well and want to support you in this. And so that was a long one, but I figured it needed a bit of context. And so for all of Our Lady of Guadalupe parishioners, let's pray for the Polish community as we wish them well in this new chapter of their community story. Thanks and God bless.